When we study history, we often picture resistance as a single defining battlefield. But how does a community like the Puebloans sustain a defense of their homeland and culture over a period of 5 centuries? Today, I will examine the history of the Pueblo peoples of the American Southwest. My central research question is how and in what ways have the Puebloans resisted the encroachment on their land and culture over time? As the historical record shows, the resistance evolved out of necessity, transitioning from armed defense to cultural preservation and ultimately to legal advocacy. To understand what the Puebloans were defending, we must first look at their origins. The ancestral Puebloans settled in the Four Corners region around 350 CE. They were masterful agriculturalists and architects. By 1000 CE, they were building complex, multi-story stone communities, as seen right there in the Mesa Verde, directly into the cliff sides, sustaining thousands of people through advanced farming techniques. Faced with severe climate variability and droughts in the late 1200s, these communities demonstrated remarkable resilience. As this map shows, they organized a mass migration south and east, eventually settling along the Rio Grande and present-day New Mexico and Arizona. Here, they established the vibrant, unified villages that would eventually face European colonization. The catalyst for their centuries-long defense began in 1540 with Francisco Vázquez de Coronado's Spanish expedition. Upon arrival, the conquistadors immediately demanded unobtainable amounts of food, clothing, and shelter from the Tiwa Pueblos. This threat of starvation and immediate violence forced the Pueblos into a corner, which sparked their initial physical resistance. The Pueblos did not simply submit. Archaeologist Matthew Schmader provides evidence of a highly organized defense during the Teaguex War of 1540 and 1541. Instead of retreating, the Pueblones utilized their multi-story architecture as defensive fortresses. By taking the high ground on their rooftops, they engineered a highly effective form of urban warfare. And as you can see in the excavated artifacts, such as the Puebloan slingstone, they engineered rounded aerodynamic stones they used as weapons, coordinating volleys to repel Spanish forces from above their multi-story pueblos. This proves that they employed planned tactical military strategies to hold their territory from the oncoming Coronado expedition. However, armed defense evolved into a devastating and costly struggle, especially since they were outgunned and outnumbered. 50 years later, in 1599, Spanish Governor Onate ordered a massive military strike on the Acoma Sky City, Pueblo, which you can see in the picture on the right and a close-up picture on the bottom left, and it's located in central left New Mexico in Acoma. This was a natural fortress built atop a mesa. To defeat this tactical high ground, the Spanish forces launched a pretty brutal attack, which killed hundreds of men, women, and children, and it forced the survivors into indentured servitude. This severe retaliation demonstrated that physical warfare was resulting in the decimation of their peoples, the Puebloan peoples, and it was clear that a broader approach was necessary to carry on their culture. As Spanish colonization tightened its grip, the focus shifted from resource extraction to the aggressive suppression of the Puebloan religion. This cultural erasure required a new form of resistance. And in 1960, in 1680, the Puebloans executed a massive, highly coordinated pan-indigenous revolt, which successfully expelled the Spanish from New Mexico for 12 years. Yet, as historian Aaron McHugh argues, this was a fundamentally an ideological movement. Upon driving the Spanish out, the Puebloans immediately focused on rebuilding their kivas, which was their traditional ceremonial room. Here on the left, you can see a modern day ruined kiva, which is actually pretty well kept and intact, and then a reconstructed kiva below where they would gather and the ceremonial leaders would do their religious practices. The ultimate objective was not merely a military victory, but the vital restoration of their social order and spiritual identity to keep their culture alive. This era of independence, however, was tragically temporary. When Diego de Vargas returned in 1692, he ruthlessly exploited internal divisions within the diminished Pueblo alliance and re-entered the territory. Utilizing especially brutal military tactics, the Spanish crushed the remaining resistance. The region remained under Spanish and Mexican authority until the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which transferred the Spanish and Mexican authority to the United States. While this treaty did allow the Pueblo peoples to maintain their ancestral villages, it marked the beginning of a new battlefield, which included complex legal fights over their land and water rights. By the 20th century, the United States had established absolute control over the region. The battlefield officially shifted from the physical canyons to the federal courts. When the 1922 Burson Bill threatened to strip 60,000 acres of land from the Pueblos to legitimize non-native squatters, the Pueblo peoples had to adapt to their strategy once again. As detailed by researcher Jessica Lee, Pueblo leaders revived the All-Indian Pueblo Council. By unifying their communities and launching a national lobbying campaign, they successfully defeated the legislation, demonstrating a profound mastery of modern political power. This legal mastery paved the way for their immense modern victories. After 64 years of relentless legal battles, the Taos Pueblo successfully pressured the government to return 48,000 acres of sacred land in 1970. Signed by President Nixon, as seen on the picture on the right, this historic victory set a massive precedent for indigenous land reclamation across the country. Furthermore, through the Amat water rights case, multiple pueblos were actually able to legally protect their historical agricultural water rights, specifically the Taos Blue Lake Pueblo. And you can see the Taos Blue Lake Pueblo on the right, and it's actually one of the same ones we saw earlier in an image. This is in the Four Corners region, and we see the water rights they upheld and the Taos Blue Lake on the left. Beyond physical land, however, resistance also required reclaiming their cultural heritage and their buried ancestors. The 1990 Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA, fundamentally shifted power dynamics, which legally forced museums to return stolen artifacts and remains. Using this crucial legal pathway, the Pueblo of Jemez achieved a monumental milestone in 1999 when they successfully repatriated and reburied nearly 2,000 of their ancestors. In the following years, up until now, you can see on the bottom right statistical graphic that hundreds of thousands of funerary objects, or millions of funerary objects, and hundreds of thousands of human remains were able to go through the NAGPRA process and be returned to the Native American tribes to which they belong over the past 27 years, 26 years, which is pretty amazing. Thank you. To conclude, the resistance of the Puebloan people has honestly been a continuous evolution. They defended themselves tactically when confronted with armed forces, and they unified to protect their spiritual practices when facing cultural erasure. They then mastered the American legal system to secure their modern sovereignty on this new battlefield. This history is not just a story of surviving colonization, it is a legacy of Native American achievement, strategy, and endurance over several hundred years. Thank you. Here is my works cited. Hope you enjoy.